the home-based webinar for Transcend for SchoolNet. This is our second webinar in this series. This is on data reporting, and with us we have Caleb Nugent and Amy Riley from Pearson. If you two would like to introduce yourselves.
Sure, that sounds great. I'm happy to go first. I'm Amy Riley, and I'm based in Austin, Texas. And I have been with Pearson for about 18 years, and I'm currently the vice president of assessment product. So I work with a great group of colleagues like Caleb to create different types of assessment like Transcend. I'm also a former special education teacher and worked with the Texas Education Agency, but the vast majority of my career has been in the area of assessment. So, Caleb, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Caleb Nugent. I've been with Pearson for 10 years. I've been working as the senior project manager for the Transcend product. And prior to that, I was a project and implementation manager for SchoolNet. So worked with both of these products pretty extensively.
Awesome.
Awesome.
We thank you both for being with us today. I am Rebecca Stokes. I am the product manager for SchoolNet for North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And like I said, today we're going to talk about data reporting in Transcend. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Amy.
All right, awesome. We'll go ahead and get started. Kimberly, just feel free at any point in time to ask questions. We can make this very informal so that we make sure we get you all the information that you need. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the design and purpose of Transcend, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today just kind of going through that again because the purpose and the design are directly impacted or connected to the actual results that we provide back. But the purpose of Transcend is an interim assessment that provides information about student performance, grade level standards at 3 different intervals throughout the year. Because it's an interim assessment, it's not intended to give really fine grained, detailed, formative assessment information, nor is it intended to serve a really high stakes decision, such as what you would see with a summative assessment that's given at the end of the year. It's in that middle part where it can be useful for school and district leaders to make certain decisions, and we'll talk about those, as well as for teachers as they're thinking about how to plan instruction. It is aligned to the local scope and sequence defined by that intelligent test blueprint. That's one of the things that makes it unique from other interim assessment products that are out there. Most of the other interim assessment products follow a common blueprint, and it's usually more similar to what you would see at the very end of the year. Whereas because Transcend is aligned to the scope and sequence, we're really only evaluating the content standards that students have had the opportunity to learn. Also, because Transcend is on grade level, meaning we only assess items and use items that assess standards that are for that particular grade, it gives a very or a more accurate picture of how students are tracking towards those end of year expectations that are based on the grade level. It's computer adaptive, so it adjusts based on individual student performance. So if students are showing that they're able to get an easy item correct, then they get a more difficult item. If they get that one correct, they get a little bit more difficult item. And if they start getting items that are incorrect based on that difficulty, then the engine scaffolds it back down. And that allows us to get a more precise measure of student performance. All right. There are 2 types of results that we think about for an interim assessment like Transcend. The first one supports school and district leaders. So that in that case, it's really about the students learning. And there's aggregated performance at the overall and domain levels within each content area. And performance compared to they're projected to perform against that summative assessment measure. It also provides information for learning that's going to be probably more applicable to teachers. A couple different pieces of information there. It provides some class variability information. So if you see in the reporting, there's sort of like these gray and purple humps that go across. And that signals to teachers the variability of student performance in her class or his class, meaning that as you're planning instruction and thinking about how much you're going to have to differentiate based on the students in a particular group, The closer students are in their performance, the more steep that little hill or is going to look. Versus if they're really performing in lots of different ways or different levels, it's going to be much flatter. We also provide information about confidence levels, which is really important when we think about assessment because all assessment has some degree of error associated with it just by virtue of the fact that we can't really look inside a student and know exactly what they know and can do. But we have varying confidence levels, and that can be useful for how a teacher should consider making decisions. If we're less confident in our results, maybe because a student is right on that bubble between two different performance levels, then that would signal that we really need to collect additional information about that student before making a decision. And then finally, there's item level reports, and that's where teachers can start to see how students are performing against different standards. We don't provide a standards mastery determination because the test is just too short to be able to support that. It would be not that information wouldn't be reliable. And we'd run the risk of making potentially poor decisions based on that data. So, as we've built this, we thought really carefully about the assessment design and the psychometric model underneath it so that we make sure that the information that we do provide is both valid and reliable. All right. So when we think about learning decisions and for learning decisions, I think about those in the context of macro decisions versus micro. And we think about those and not in terms of level of importance because they're both really important decisions, but really more in terms of like the grain size. So for a district or school leader, they can use this information to determine which students or groups of students could benefit from additional supports. They could also use it to decide where additional resources should be allocated, such as paraprofessional staff, as you implement curriculum in a school or a certain intervention, this can give you information about how well it's being implemented or if it's effective. So if there's multiple opportunities for teachers to sort of have choice over how they're pacing or the particular strategies and things like that, you can start to kind of see differences across performance. Also taking into account, of course, the makeup of that particular class, et cetera. If a particular intervention is being used, this allows you to have kind of like a baseline with the first interim assessment and then be able to see how students are progressing as a result of that intervention. And then ultimately, it allows you to see, are we making progress towards proficiency? So we have here over to the right an example of a student perform or groups of student performance across these three assessments. And the different colors represent the different performance levels. And that's going to be your indicator towards your state summative performance. And we can start to see that as students receive more instruction, we have more students moving towards approaching having met the standards or having met proficiency. We also have data that supports more micro decisions. So these types of decisions are going to be more specific. How similar or different is the performance among all the students tested in my class, and how does that impact my planning? So I mentioned a moment ago that we have these humps, and I need to find a better word to be able to describe that. But these particular visualizations actually contain information that may be helpful for a teacher in planning. Here you'll see, and it's actually very hard to see, but underneath here are some scores. And what this demonstrates is that for this particular group of students, we really have a wide range of student performance across them. So you have like a few students at each of these different score points. And what that would indicate then is that there's probably quite a bit of differentiation that needs to take place in the classroom, as opposed to when it's really all clustered together. That signals to the teacher that more students are actually performing more similarly. We also provide information about specific domains within the content standards. And in this way, a teacher can start to see measurement and data over here seems to be an area of relative weakness compared to numbers based 10. And from there, the teacher would probably want to drill down and leverage formative assessments to understand better, like which particular standards their students are having trouble with. We also do provide, as part of the reporting, item level measures of the different standards. So, in this particular case, if you can see this little graphic with the red X's, this is the cluster of standards underneath measurement and data. And you can start to see that in general, across those standards, at least this particular student struggled with those items. And then finally, we have this notion of the confidence band, which I mentioned. And so you'll see these dark circles around the performance levels. So in this particular instance, a student is classified as a level 3, which is approaching expectations. And we have a fair degree of confidence here that the student is classified correctly as a level 3 based on our measure. Um, and so if the circle is not filled in as much, then we're less confident, and that's going to signal that that student is more on that bubble, what we referred to when I was a teacher as bubble, meaning that it's very close to the line between, say, a 3 and a 4, or a 2 and a 3. All right. Just another quick note about results interpretation. We recommend, and I think this is a broadly shared perspective, certainly not one necessarily unique to Pearson. But like all assessments, Transcend data is just a snapshot and a point in time. And of course, does not take into account the morning that the student had, other things that are going on in that student's life, what that particular day looks like for that student. And so all this information really should be triangulated with the other information that teachers have about what students know and can do. If a result, for example, does not seem typical of how a student performs based on what the teacher observes in the classroom, then it should be considered in light of that. The other thing I wanted to mention about Transcend in particular and how it's unique from other interim assessments is because it does follow a scope and sequence design, meaning that in the first assessment, I'm only assessing the standards that were selected in the intelligent test blueprint. And then in the second assessment, I'm adding a few more that were covered between the first assessment and the second assessment from an instructional perspective. The growth will not look as drastic as it does when I use that same blueprint 3 times a year. And that's because if I use the same blueprint 3 times a year, students have really only been taught maybe a third of those standards that have been that they've received in the test. And so as a result, as you test with those additional assessments, you will see greater growth because the student did not have the opportunity to learn based on that first one. Transcend is really actually the opposite. If a student's score stays relatively the same, that actually means that the student is keeping up with the pace of instruction. We will see students progress for sure as they receive more instruction, but it's not going to look as drastic by virtue of the design. And that doesn't mean that the student isn't growing in their learning. I just wanted to share this with you so you have it. You can always feel free to reach out to myself, Caleb, or Catherine, as well as Rebecca. So we've provided email addresses for you. And then now we're going to actually take a look at some data. I'm just gonna, all right. Let me just pause for a second and do a quick check to see if there are any questions so far. It's a lot of information.
There aren't any in the chat. Oh, and she just said no, that she does not have any questions.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm logged in currently to SchoolNet. And if I clicked here on the reporting menu item and go to reporting dashboard, then I'm going to click on my Transcend reports. I have actually, let me go back here. I just want to see if I can go back. Yep. Okay. And then I'm going to select my particular content area. And you'll see this is really just some test data that we've collected. It doesn't represent any live students. That's why it's pretty sparse. But there are a couple things here that I want to be able to point out to you. The first one is that the permissions are based on when if you're a district level user, you have access to the district reports, the school reports, the class reports, and the student reports. If you're a school leader, it starts at the school level of what you would have access to, and then it goes class and student. Teachers only have access to class level data for their particular classes, and then student level results. So that's how it's organized. Um, if fewer than 4 students have assessed, we don't show the aggregated data. So we need at least 4 students to test before this will be available. So if I click on grade 3, I can start to see those humps that I mentioned to you. So here we can start to see that more students were around the mean score, which obviously makes sense. So you can see there's a mean score of 410. Transcend is on uses scale scores and has a scale score range of 300 to 500. So this is just slightly better than the halfway point in the scale score range. Over to the right, I start to see the breakdown of the performance levels. So this class has 13, or I'm sorry, this school has 13 students, and you can see the distribution of students across the different performance levels. If I click on this eye icon here, I can get additional information about what all of this means. So this describes what those visualizations or humps actually means in terms of the distribution of scores across students. I can click on this one and understand what the performance levels are actually describing. This will take you to a different set of reports, etc. So the eye icon is really helpful in terms of both navigation and then results interpretation. So I'm going to drill down here into this particular school. And I'm going to see very similar information, but now I have my school level information and I have my class level information. This particular class is Barbosa. And because I only have one class in here, it's going to look exactly the same as the other information at the school level and actually at the district level as well. So in a live situation, you should be able to see all the classes that are within grade 3 for mathematics, and then you're able to take a look at the differences in performance, and you can dig in a little bit deeper from there. The same would be the case at the district level, where if there's multiple schools, then when you expand that out, you can see the differences in performance by school. So I'm going to click on details again, just to drill down a little bit further. And now I can see additional information about the 13 students that tested for grade 3 mathematics for the first interim assessment. So I've got an overall mean of 410 for my scale score. This represents the standard deviation that was applied as part of the measurement. And then I've got information on the different domains that were assessed for this particular measure. Now, this shows up because as part of the Intelligent Test Blueprint, the district made the decision that they would be assessing standards in each of these different domains. If a standard was not selected, or I'm sorry, standards within a domain were not selected, then you wouldn't see this information because that means that the student didn't see those items. So this will grow as you are assessing more standards in Assessment 2 and Assessment 3. But for now, we can start to take a look and see that numbers-based 10 appears to be an area of relative strength, and numbers and fractions is an area of relative weakness. And so that would signal to the teacher that that's an area that more students are struggling with by virtue of their score. This information here tells you where these students are falling in an aggregated way in the performance levels. So we've got the majority of the students that are here in performance level 4. That's where that mean puts them. And then you can start to see the variability of students across the different performance levels as well. So if I click on this icon, I can continue to get just the additional information. We provide the titles of the different domains, so that's available. as well as, again, describing what the performance levels mean. Now I'm going to click on 13 students tested. So when you see that it's underlined, that's a signal that you can click on it and keep drilling down for more information. And now I have my status roster report. And there's several features here that I want to be able, or I want to share with you. The first one is you'll see these different toggles or arrows, and this allows teachers to be able to sort and sort the students. So if I want to focus on my students who are performing not as well based on this assessment, I can click on that and start to think about how I might group them. I can also do this though by domain, and this might allow me then to focus on grouping students, providing some additional supports to them based on their performance within that particular domain. The other things I want to indicate to you about this particular report is that you'll see here that confidence band that I mentioned to you. And so if this again just indicates the degree of certainty about a particular student's performance level. Other things are indicated here in terms of the where the student's score is relative to that 300 to 500 scale. So these little visualizations will be further to the left if students received a lower scale score, and further to the right if they received a higher scale score. If these visualizations are really wide, then that means that they received a wide variety of difficulty items and performed in a varied way. If the little visualizations are tighter together, that means that the algorithm within the computer adaptive assessment was able to hone in on the particular difficulty where the right spot for the student. Let's see. Again, we have the eye icon if you need additional information. And I am going to click now on Lorraine and we'll look at the individual student report. So you'll see here for Lorraine that we are less confident about being a performance level 4 than we were some of the other students. And that's because she received a 406 and it's much closer to performance level 3. And so this would be an area where a teacher would say, I think Lorraine is doing really well, but she's kind of close to that performance level 3. So I'm going to want to make sure to collect additional information, or maybe just kind of keep an eye to make sure that she's staying on track. Because we probably would want to have more confidence if the goal is for her to be a 4 or even a 5 on the next assessment. I can start to see how Lorraine's performance differs by the different domains. And here we see that, again, that numbers and fractions is an area of relative weakness where she could probably use some additional support. Let's see, trying to remember if there's other things. There's the eye icon here. Caleb, can you think of other things I might want to touch base on this particular report?
I don't think on that screen. I think it's just drilling down to the item mapping from here.
Okay. So again, we have the link here with an underline. And so if I drill down further, now I can see Lorraine's, her performance by item. And so this is our item mapping report, and I can sort it in different ways. Here is how she performed based on the sequence of the items. Here's how she performed if I want to group them by standard. And here's how she performed based on the item difficulty. And it goes from least to most difficult. So I'm going to go back to standard here and take a look. And I can see the different standards that were selected as part of the Intelligent Test Blueprint. We sample across standards, and so, but we exclude standards that were not actually indicated within that Intelligent Test Blueprint. So for this particular one, it looks like OA.1 was selected, so she received quite a bit more of those items than what we would have seen if OA.1, OA.2, OA.3 were selected. In that case, she maybe only saw 1 or 2 items for each of those standards. If I start to drill in, look at a little bit more in this data, I'm going to go to numbers and fractions where I know she struggled, and you'll see that out of the 5 questions, she received 2 that were correct. I can also take a look and see the item difficulty. So that may be useful in understanding if students are able to generally get more easier items correct, but they're struggling with more difficult items, then maybe they have a partial understanding of that standard and they still need some additional instruction. And I think that is it. I do want to just actually mention one more thing quickly. So I mentioned that we have the scale score range from 300 to 500. As part of we refer to it as the item calibration process, we actually are able to order all of the items on that particular scale. And so you can see that this item has a relative difficulty of 407 versus this item has a relative difficulty of 415. And so that's what these numbers are referring to. So when you take a look at them, it may be helpful to think about it in terms of that's from a 300 to a 500. Those are my boundaries. And I believe that is it. Unless Caleb, you can think of anything else that I might have missed.
No, I think you hit everything and covered it well.
Like I said, Caleb and Amy, thank you so much for joining us and presenting on this today. And I will see you tomorrow for another session.
Sounds great. Thank you guys.
All
All
right.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day.
Bye bye.